Hello, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. Our topic today is Google's Big Downtown West project. Alex Shoor of Catalyze Silicon Valley will report on his group's rating of the project, and then we'll hear from Edward Saum of the Downtown Area Neighborhood Group, or DANG, and Noel Fernandez of Silicon Valley Rising. And that's what's coming up on Valley Politics. Welcome, everyone, and welcome Alex Shoor of Catalyze Silicon Valley. Alex, tell us who Catalyze Silicon Valley is and what's your process for evaluating new developments.
Sure. Thanks again, Terry, for having us back on the show. Appreciate it. Catalyze SV is made of grassroots community members, just like you and me, who care about what happens in our community and our cities in Silicon Valley. And our members are deeply rooted in this community, and yet they're also what we call regionalists. They think about what is good for the entire region. How do we solve these issues of equity, affordability, congestion, and transportation from a broad perspective? So even though we dig really deep on individual projects in neighborhoods, we think about them from a regional perspective. And our process is pretty simple. Once a month, a developer of a project that interests our staff, our members, comes in and presents a project, right now virtually via Zoom, hopefully again soon in person, presents their development project. Our members ask questions, the developer answers those questions, then the developer heads home, and our members, using the 7 criteria we're going to talk about in a few minutes, score those projects. And so it's sort of a hybrid model. We've got very structured ways of talking about what are the criteria that we care about and how do we define those. But we also allow each of our individual members to share their views on what makes a project really good and how it could be made better.
Well, you've just gone through the process with Google's project, probably the mega project of all time for San Jose. So I know you have 7 specific criteria to rate projects. So let's go through those criteria for the Google Downtown West project, starting with community, first criteria.
Yeah, and community for us is about how much do you engage the community. There have been many voices that haven't been part of the community engagement process for decades, and it's important that they are heard in that process as well. We think Google's done some innovative things on the community engagement front, and yet, like all developers, we think it's really important for a developer to reflect back to the community what it heard and what ideas and improvements it's been able to implement. So for Google, we appreciate the extent of the community engagement and some of the creative tools that they've used. We recommend that they continue to be transparent so the community knows, yes, we've heard you and we're making changes and improvements in response to what you've said.
Well, we're going to talk to representatives of a couple other community groups in a minute. We'll see what they think about that. Affordability, your second criterion.
Yeah, affordability is such a crucial criteria for us. Because of this massive housing crisis we continue to face here in Silicon Valley, we really need to build the affordable housing needed. So for this project, like a lot of projects, there are a lot of key components. The first question is, how much affordable housing are they going to provide? On the housing generally, Google says we're going to build up to 5,900 units, but they may build as little as 4,000 units. If they go to that lower number, and 25% of that lower number, we'd lose almost 500 affordable housing units. So Catalyze SV is asking Google to hit that max of 5,900 homes in order to make sure we have as much affordable housing as possible. The second thing on affordability that's really crucial is affordable housing on site. Mm-hmm. The time of segregated neighborhoods based on income or race or other factors, that ends now. We can't have that anymore in this community. We need to have integrated neighborhoods people of different backgrounds living together in the same place. So we want to see Google make those 25% affordable housing units here on site. And then the third thing on affordability is making affordable housing for the folks who don't have much money, the folks on low income or fixed income or formerly homeless folks. It's so crucial that affordable housing include homes for those who are most in need. So that's the area median income is a little bit lower.
Third criterion is transportation. Surely this project scores pretty well on that because it's going to be next to a train station and a BART station. What about other elements of transportation?
Yeah, I think Google is accounting for the fact that we have Diridon Station, a fantastic resource for transportation. And they're doing some good things by trying to make this area more pedestrian and friendly and bike friendly and transit oriented. They're proposing to provide transit passes for their employees. And I think this is something that others will agree with in this conversation today. The transit passes they provide for their employees should not just be for Google employees. They should also be for the contractors who are providing food for Google employees or cleaning up the space. It's important from an equity perspective that transit passes are provided to all people who are coming onto the site. And transit passes, when you purchase many of them through VTA, you can really reduce the price quite a bit, down to $45 per transit pass. So we think transit passes should be extended to the new residents who are coming to the area, because with Google's projection of a 35% of the folks working on site will be drivers, that's still 7,000 cars coming into the area. And at a transit-rich area like this, that is building for a future where we're relying less on cars and cutting down the greenhouse gas emissions from them, it's so incredibly important that we get people moving around in ways other than the individually driven automobile.
Next criterion is legacy. What's that?
Well, legacy is about looking back, and in this case with Google, it's also about looking forward. This is going to be one of the most important developments in probably the next and perhaps past 100 years in the city of San Jose. And so we not only have to honor the past, like Google is proposing to do with preserving the San Jose Water building right there on Santa Clara Street, but it's also about looking forward. This is an opportunity to remake an entire neighborhood, to improve the city itself. And the way we do that is by creating a legacy that maybe honors other aspects of our past, like the Valley of the Heart's Delight that we used to be world famous for. But also looking forward, how do we make this in a place that's iconic and world-class, that people across San Jose, across Silicon Valley, and across the world want to come to and say, this is San Jose and I love it.
And how did your folks score Google on that one, on legacy?
Legacy scored pretty well. We recognize that Google's doing things like trying to honor the history of the site. And so generally that's a category that they scored 4 out of 5. So we think there's room for improvement, but we also appreciate Google's effort to design with the community in mind and to consider legacy. Again, there are some other ideas. We obviously want to see them support the historic station building. Even if it's moved, we want to see it as part of this general area to continue to honor the history of the Diridon area.
Next criterion is intensity. That's an important one, but also a controversial one. So what did Catalyze think about the Google project on the criterion of intensity? Yeah.
Well, it's one of the criteria where our members scored it the highest, a 5 out of 5. I think overall, Google is trying to build the amount of homes and the amount of office that's appropriate for a downtown area in the 10th largest city in America. And we think that that's really crucial for San Jose growing up from adolescence to adulthood as a world-class city. We also think that there are opportunities for some of those mid-rise buildings that they're talking about to come up a little higher, again, in the service of addressing the affordable housing crisis and maximizing the potential benefit of tax revenue. When you have a lot of people in a small area, it's what I like to say, there's more good guys than bad guys. As the old urban planner Jane Jacobs used to call it eyes on the street. And so creating a really great neighborhood involves a lot of people, and that's what we need to get ready for the 21st century here in San Jose.
Well, this is a very important one for the neighborhoods around the Downtown West project, so we'll hear from them in just a couple of minutes. Next criterion for Catalyze was sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability, Google's doing some incredible things. On-site power generation, recycled water, again, trying to get folks moving around through things like improvements to the Los Gatos and Guadalupe River trails. And we think this is an area where Google could do more. So they're proposing one of the catch-all criteria for evaluating how environmentally friendly a project is, leadership in environmental design, and they're going for the gold rating, which is the second highest. We'd like to see them push that up to platinum. A project this big with an environmental footprint, we think that they could do even better to make this project the highest potential for environmental sustainability. So we would encourage Google to go in that direction.
And the final criterion is vibrancy. This is a tricky one to measure. I would say our current downtown is scoring low on vibrancy, certainly in the pandemic era it is. How does the Downtown West project score on vibrancy?
Well, it scores really well. I mean, the thing that, as you know, Terry, better than most, that we've struggled with in San Jose is building neighborhoods that are a mix of shops, offices, retail, homes, open and green space. And that's been one of the biggest struggles for us as we move into the next iteration of San Jose's history. So the fact that this is a site where all of those things will be really in close proximity to each other is one of the things that our members really loved about Google's proposal. We think that integrating those things in a short period of time, providing space for people to recreate, for people to see the arts is really, really important. I think Google has done a fantastic job. Our members scored it 5 out of 5, but continuing to flesh out what that looks like. How do we, again, honor this place and the people? How do we create places that are appealing for not just the folks who have been here for 100 years, but the folks who just came in the last 20 years and are coming in the years ahead? We're an incredibly rich, diverse city, and we've got to create a new neighborhood that accounts for and accommodates all the different cultures and people of our valley.
So those are the specific criteria that you evaluated on. What was the overall score? What's Catalyze's overall rating for the Downtown West project?
Yeah, it scored pretty high, 4.29 out of 5. In the life of Catalyze SV, we've scored 22 projects, and we've looked at overall 28 projects. Our members have dug really deep into this one. We first heard from Google last December 2019 and January 2020. We then put out a letter saying, hey, Google, here's some things we think are really promising about your early plans and some things we would like you to incorporate. And Google was responsive to many of those ideas from Catalyze SV, especially on the vibrancy front, on emphasizing how to get around, how to make it pedestrian oriented and walkable, and how to create more vibrancy. And then when we scored the project again in October, that's when it scored a 4.29 out of 5. That's one of the highest scores we've ever scored a project. We've had, I believe, 3 or 4 other projects that we've scored even higher. All of those have been 100% affordable housing projects. So this is the highest scoring project for us that includes market rate housing. So it is a really promising project, but we should expect a lot from this project because it is so crucial for the history of San Jose, and it's so important for addressing some of the big challenges we have around affordability, equity, vibrancy, sustainability, etc.
Other community groups have also been actively commenting on the Google project, including the Diridan Area Neighborhood Group, or DANG, a coalition of neighborhoods adjacent to the project, and Silicon Valley Rising, a coalition of community and labor activists. Edward Saum joins us today representing DANG, and Maria Noel Fernandez is here representing Silicon Valley Rising. Welcome, Edward Saum of DANG and Maria Noel Fernandez of Silicon Valley Rising. So Edward, representing Dang, what's Dang's reaction to the Catalyze scorecard and to the Downtown West project in general?
In general, the first thing, I think Alex's kind of 7-point process is an excellent way to kind of talk about a project of this scope. First and foremost, Google should be commended for the breadth of their community outreach. I mean, I've walked the Alameda with members of the Google team where we talked about the things that made the Beautiful Way a success and how these can be replicated in Downtown West. They've been consistently approachable and willing to talk through the issues. So to me and to Dang as a whole, the extent of Google's outreach should be the norm for any substantial development proposal, and sadly, it isn't. In terms of affordability, I'll confess, I'm a long-term renter who spends 40% of my net pay on rent. So I think the 25% affordable housing goal should be the minimum for the entire Diridon Station area plan. Google is leading the charge here, but maximizing that number across all of the DSA, not just the 80 acres of Downtown West, I think this is an important first step, and we should actively encourage that. Transportation, as someone who lives 3/4 of a mile away, and the final product after build out is important, but we're also talking about years of construction phasing and staging. Mm-hmm. We should emphasize the need for a project-wide interim services mitigations. Long before the end game's in place, there could be at least a decade of in-process transportation issues to address. The city's downtown transportation plan should be expedited and included in the Downtown West analysis. A once-in-a-lifetime development like this should have the most updated transportation data and models. So not insisting that the DTP be completed before the entitlements go forward, I think is a missed opportunity. In terms of legacy, I've been the chair of the city's Historic Landmarks Commission for the last 6 years. At the November HLC meeting, Google's historical consultants said that, quote, we didn't evaluate properties in the buffer zone, meaning these properties within 200 feet of the development proposal. Well, the scorecard claims otherwise. The water company building is a city landmark. When the HLC reviewed development proposals for the site in 2005 and 2016, it was a recommended condition of approval that they adaptively reuse it. This is one of the core tenets of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. So it's not an addition, it is a minimum. I mean, there are 9 historic resource structures within Downtown West. The proposal calls to demolish 5 of those, including 3 residences. Saving less than half of the historic resources and none of the historic housing isn't really kind of exceeding the mandate. I think in intensity and zoning, we need to look at Downtown West, high-speed rail, and the DISC collectively. Each is getting its entitlements in a silo as the process goes, but each is going to have substantial implications and design ramifications on the others. So I think on something this broad, they need to reflect the end games of their respective adjacencies more accurately. Vibrancy, one thing I agree completely with their findings. I would like to see a departure from the typical approach. I had a developer chastise me once saying that chains are the brass ring for developments. No one's gonna bicycle, walk, or drive past 3 Starbucks or Subways to get to the Downtown West Starbucks or Subway. And it's not gonna happen. So I think unique destination commercial spaces need to be the linchpin of the ground floor activation strategy. And I think Alex would definitely obviously agree with that. I worry about using kind of a finite fixed product like a scorecard here, because on a project of this scale, I think we'd rather continue the conversation with Google so that the project continues to get better. And the scorecard is harder to apply to a 80-acre proposal than it is to a single block proposal.
Okay, thank you. Maria Noel, what's the Silicon Valley Rising perspective on the project?
Sure, well, thank you for having me with you. First, let me just share where my perspective really stems from. And Silicon Valley Rising is a coalition of faith, labor, and community organizations. And we centered the thousands of service workers that work on tech campuses like Google's, including janitors, cafeteria workers, security officers, and shuttle bus drivers, and their families. And, you know, I think we all know things are tough for far too many in Silicon Valley. 1 in 3 people can't afford to meet their basic needs, and we represent and work with those people every day. So when Silicon Valley Rising thinks of the Catalyze scorecard, we really think of the importance of housing as an issue that's at the center of these categories, because it's also at the center of working families' lives. For issues that Catalyze looked at, like sustainability, legacy, transportation, in some big ways, we really see all of this overlapping. For example, affordability is sustainability, When you think about how people who are pushed out from San Jose, so many of our families have to drive hours a day on congested freeways, or think about janitors and cafeteria workers commuting to their new jobs at the Google campus. If we want these folks to take public transportation, like Alex mentioned, we need it to be affordable. So housing and anti-displacement are really at the center of all these issues that we see Catalyze looking at. Now, reacting to a more specific aspect of the card, affordability. Catalyze gave the Google development a score of 4 out of 5 affordability, and said it was because of Google's commitment to the 1,000 homes with 25% affordable housing. We believe that's an important start. But here's the thing, the project is still far from set in stone, in our view. And the needs in our community are real, and frankly, in the middle of a pandemic, things are getting worse. So Google's project could cost renters tens of millions in additional rent each year. Google has said they want to be a good neighbor. They have shown willingness to listen to the community. It's an important start, but it's just that, a start. And we need a community benefits plan to further stabilize the community. So that's why we believe Google can show their seriousness to make sure that families can stay in their homes. And we'd love to give them a high score, but only can do that if there's a special fund for responding to urgent community needs that go beyond housing creation. Things like anti-eviction defense for tenants, or projects to preserve our affordable housing that already exists. And one more thing I'll say on this is that any fund like this has to have strong community governance, and that's how we'll score them. To me, what that means is that we have community members who look like San Jose, and have lived issues of injustice on the board, and they can make decisions on what projects to fund. Community knows what it needs. They need to be at the decision-making table. Right now, we have a mayor, in our view, that has repeatedly shown that he cares about the interests of developers and big corporations more than he does about working families and people of color. And we don't want the mayor and a handful of bureaucrats that work for him treating the community benefits package as a slush fund for pet projects. We believe community funds are supposed to benefit our communities, and our communities really need to shape how those funds are spent. So I'll just close by saying the question that ignited the creation of Silicon Valley Rising is the question that I still have today, and is, will tech development truly bring prosperity for all? Can it? We believe we've got to envision something better than we've ever seen before. I think that's what you're hearing from all the panelists today. And Google and the city of San Jose have a real chance to set a new precedent for what tech development can look like, with the strongest possible commitments, not just listening, but actual commitments to anti-displacement and community stabilization. And action on these fronts is how we'll score whether this project will work for all of San Jose.
Alex, do you want to comment on what our other panelists have said? And I think particularly Maria Noel is addressing the issue of displacement. Was that part of the Catalyze evaluation process, dealing with displacement?
Yeah, I think praise goes to Maria Noel and Silicon Valley Rising. They've been leading a discussion for now many years on this project. Some of the leading voices right at the outset talking about equity, community benefits. And so thank you all for leading that charge. And I think that helped us think even more and deeper about equity. I think the city has some important role to play in the housing department. And even though Catalyze SV doesn't work as much on protections or preservation, two of the other P's in the 3P legacy that we're all familiar with when it comes to building housing, that's something that certainly the city's worked on. I've worked on it through the city's Housing and Community Development Commission. So those protections are important to me personally. They haven't been part of the scorecard because we don't work as much as a policy-making body. We're more evaluating a specific project. But of course, we think displacement is incredibly important. In this case, in this neighborhood, there aren't a lot of residents in the actual area where Diridon works. It's a lot of single-story parking lots, industrial buildings that are now abandoned because Google has bought them and bought out the tenants who have been there or the business owners. So we definitely know that displacement is an issue. And what I like about Silicon Valley Rising is they're thinking about displacement from an entire community's perspective, that if we create a gleaming neighborhood only for the wealthy, that is going to have ripple effects throughout the city on affordability, equity, and displacement. So again, I think that's where we share with Silicon Valley Rising such a commitment to affordability on site and a real belief that we need much more inclusive and integrated neighborhoods than we've seen in this city and across America for the last 50 to 100 years.
I have a question for you all, and that is certainly Edward and Alex, and maybe Maria Noel agrees with this too, have said that Google's done a pretty good job of listening and doing outreach to the community, and certainly been a long process. My question is, do you think the city's done as good a job as Google has? Edward, let's start with you.
I will be delicate and say no, and I will couch that by saying one of the things that's kind of at the core of the formation of DANG, the Deer Dahan Area Neighborhood Group. It's a coalition of neighborhoods of activists and residents who live around the perimeter of the Deer Dahan Station area. At the Station Area Advisory Group process, it was clear that other than the neighbors, I was my neighborhood association's appointment, everybody else there was there as a paid professional. So it was a series of small individual neighbor voices versus people that 40 hours a week, this is their passion, this is what they're doing. So I think as independent volunteer neighborhood leaders, then we can perhaps have a louder voice and make the project better for all as a result. The city has done copious outreach, but copious outreach that doesn't go as deep, I think, as Google has done. So I would give Google more credit in that regard than I would the city.
Maria, what do you think?
Look, I agree with Edward in a lot of that. I think it's been messy. I think, and what I mean by messy is that when we first heard about Google potentially coming to San Jose, we all got the press release and all the glitz and the glam related to that. The first thing we set our eye on is to make sure that this was an inclusive process that really heard from the community, and not just heard, but acted on the concerns from the community. And we had to fight for that. We actually had to fight to create our own town halls and community meetings early on. We had to fight to talk about the importance of funding going to community priorities. We had to actually defend and put out what we meant by real, authentic community engagement. And so I think we're in a better place now, but I don't want us to forget what it took to get to where we are, because it was on the backs of so many community members and organizers that has got us to where we are. So I think there's learnings, and my hope is that when we get the next glitzy glam thing, we'll be in a different place.
Alex, we're down to about 30 seconds, so you get the last word.
Well, overall, I think the city of San Jose has done some of its better community engagement in this project and in the greater Deer Dahan area where it's been focusing. On the other hand, the community engagement process in general across this country does two things not as well as it could. Number one, it doesn't always bring all voices to the table. The full diversity of our community needs to be better represented, like groups like Silicon Valley Rising have been doing, so that it's not just the privileged and the powerful and the property owners who are in charge of how a community talks about a project. And the second thing it really needs to do is, once we all get to the table, we need to have really productive conversations. They need to be collaborative, and we need to share ideas and listen to each other. And then we need to reflect back what we heard and how we're going to incorporate those ideas. That is one of the major keys of community engagement that is always difficult for governments to do.
And with that, we're out of time. Thank you. On the community engagement front, of course, it's been tougher with the pandemic. We can't all be together in the same room, and that takes a lot away from the community's ability and will to participate. But thank you all for joining us on Zoom today. Maria Noel Fernandez of Silicon Valley Rising, Edward Saum of DANG, and Alex Shoor of Catalyze Silicon Valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry.
Terry, great to see you.
We'll be back next month with further updates on Valley politics. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can catch up on all our previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for Create TV San Jose. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching.